There we go. So just make sure you're aware this is being recorded and you give consent for this to be recorded. Is that correct?
Absolutely fine.
Thank you very much. So please take it away.
So I'm very pleased to meet you and to introduce you to something about person-centered art therapy, to introduce you to this model and explain to you why some of the fundamentals around non-directivity and some of the benefits of using this model. And I'm doing that for part of your education for this assessment that you're doing. Okay, so what I'd like to do, just really briefly, is I'd like you to each introduce yourself to me. How about if I introduce myself to you first? So I would say, okay, who am I? My name is Annie de la Prida. I'm a creative arts counsellor and psychotherapist. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I'm a lecturer. I teach on counselling courses. I've been teaching these courses since about 2005, and I'm a budding writer. So that's me. Okay. So how would you introduce yourselves to me?
Hello, my name is Minenhle Majola. I'm a student at City College. This is my second year in level 5 diploma in person-centered and psychotherapy.
Would you like to hear?
Yeah, I'm Paulo. I'm studying person-centered counseling in City College, and I am interested in creative aspects of therapy also. I have different interests regarding art also, and I think creativity is a great way to explore and it's very free and for people to express themselves.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm Charlotte. I also study counselling psychotherapy, as the other guys have explained. I live in Reading. In my spare time, I enjoy socialising, getting to know people, and yeah, just really got into get started really.
Okay, wonderful. Now, what I'd like to do is, can you enable screen sharing so that I can share my screen with you?
Yeah.
Do you know how to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere there. Yeah. Screen.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that should be okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so you see here, this is the screen that how I introduced myself to you just now. We've all got to know each other. Now I'm going to introduce myself using an image. Okay. So here, this is me. So I'd like you to just look at that for a moment and just think about, what do you think that says about me?
Okay. Shall we express what we think?
Yeah.
Okay. Sensibility. That's my view, obviously.
I think it's quite bright. It's very bright. It's very delicate. It's very pretty, is what I'd probably describe personally.
I would say it's an open aura, bright colors, and the blue sky as well.
Okay. So all of that was an interpretation.
Yeah.
Exactly what, when working with art, you have to not do with working with this approach. So it's very hard to not interpret, in actual fact. It's harder when working with the visual than it is with words. So really quickly, as soon as you look at an image, there's already a sense of something. So let me introduce myself here. So this is me as a flower. And I would say that it's a very vibrant image. And I would say that I'm a very vibrant person. And there are quite a lot of layers to me, and I'm fairly open. I don't show all of me though, but I can show quite a lot of depth. And although some of the petals and even the interior is quite fragile, in actual fact, I don't feel fragile because you can knock quite a few petals off and I will still be a flower. I can take quite a lot of damage, I think I'm saying, and still be whole.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to invite you, without talking, just to see if you were an image today, if you were a flower today, right now, what flower would you be? Just allow, not without talking, and I'll explain why that's important in a moment. Just allow that image to come into your mind and try not to censor and try not to worry about how well you can draw. And just take a minute or two to put that down on paper.
I've done it.
That's all right.
Okay, great. Now, part of the reason for asking you not to talk is because when you're working with an image, it comes from a different part of your brain, and talking can stop the process because it can put you into a left brain processing, whereas this comes from another part of you that knows without words. So what I'd like to check first is thinking about how I've introduced myself as a flower. How do you feel you know me now? Are there any differences to when we first met and I introduced myself and now, you know, how would you describe that? What does that feel like?
What do you mean regarding the description?
I was gonna say, I think in regards to like when I came across like very delicate and very like fragile, so then now I'm more surprised because the fact that I've got an awareness of like you're more resilient. So then my first interpretation was very delicate and very fragile. So now I've got more of an awareness that actually, like you say, it's a lot more resilient, a lot more say more strength and a lot more structured in regards to like who you are. So yeah, that's what I would say personally.
So you know something more of me now that I introduced myself as a flower than I did when I introduced with words?
I've seen a different side of you from using a flower and through the technique.
Yeah, the flower was more descriptive. You know, obviously we know much more about you through the flower than the mere formal description that you have made of yourself.
Exactly. As soon as we work with art or image, it's a different level. You know something more of me, much more personal. So I'd like to invite you then, I don't know who would like to go first, to maybe hold up your image. I'll take a screenshot if that's okay. And just introduce yourself as the flower that you've drawn, as I did.
Okay, this is a very basic drawing. I drew a tulip. This is supposed to be a tulip. I just drew what came to my mind as a flower. When you spoke about flower, the first thing that came to my mind was a tulip. And I started to reflect on it and why did this tulip come to my mind? And somehow I associate this tulip with a writer who is Alexander Dumas. He writes adventure books. Mm-hmm. And what I find, you know, very interesting, some of his stories. And I think it's something related with adventure, with freedom.
So there's something about adventure and freedom.
Yeah.
And you recognize that as being about you would.
Yeah, and the fact that, you know, it comes to my mind, the tulip and his name without thinking about it.
Okay, so tulip, what comes up for you when you think of tulip? Tell me something of the qualities of tulip.
No, they're exuberant.
So tulips are exuberant?
Yeah, they're exuberant, they are colorful, they are exotic in some way, till a certain point, you know, before in the past, they were like almost the price of diamonds in the beginning when they were produced. Now they are very common. I mean, in a certain way.
Okay, so something very exuberant that was very precious, somehow less precious, more common, but there's something very exuberant about the tulip and very exotic. Do you recognise that as about you?
Maybe it's interesting, you know, to go through that path, because at first I didn't think about that.
Exactly. And what comes out on an image isn't what you're thinking about. It comes from another place.
Yeah.
The process is then for you to recognise consciously what it's saying about you. But okay, so if we can leave that to one side for a moment and see who else would like to introduce yourself as a flower.
Okay. There we are.
Oh. Not able to, okay. Right, okay, I've got that, yeah.
Okay, I am a primrose flower.
Uh-huh.
I'm not good with drawing. I'm not good with drawing, but it's a primrose flower, which really reminds me of my childhood. When I was young, I used to see loads of those and I just fell in love with them. They just remind me of happy times, that's all.
So something about happy times and about when you were young, that's coming to mind.
Yeah.
And something about the qualities of a primrose, how would you describe them?
Oh, they are a bit delicate. You have to look at them properly, feed them nicely. Just look after them, really.
And do you recognise that as being about you?
Sort of, yeah.
Great, okay, thank you.
The daffodil of a daisy. Daisy.
I'm just going to screenshot. So you've drawn a daisy?
Yeah, I drew a daisy, and it's the first thing that came to my mind. I think they're quite bright, they're quite perky, which I'd say is something, they're quite happy. Is what I've
quite bright, quite perky, quite happy. You recognise that too about you?
I'm quite, I think that just resonates with like how I'm feeling right now, and yeah, I would say I'm quite a perky, bright individual. When I say bright, it's more to do with the factors that is the enjoyment that they give, not necessarily to do with intellects or anything. So it's more of that. So I drew a daisy.
So, just have a feel now. What does this feel like in terms of connection and intimacy and depth, as compared to the first couple of minutes when we met and you introduced yourself? What does this feel like?
It's a completely different perspective. It's a different level of understanding and of going much deeper in ourselves, even maybe aspects that we're not much aware in a conscious way.
So you can see working with an image instantly allows for a depth to emerge that doesn't with talking. And there are lots of reasons why that is. So what I've done is just allowed you to introduce yourself, and I've just done some reflecting and wanting to understand and empathising. Okay, but now if you're happy to work, let's work with the daisy, as that's where we were, and I sort of interrupted you. Let me illustrate some of the skills that we can do when working with an image in a little more depth. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I will, let me see, if I do that, I think I can screen share again. So we can look at the same image again together, which makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so have you got the image there that I'm looking at?
Yeah, we got the image, yeah.
And you can see my cursor, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, okay. I'm so sorry, I forgot your name. I can only think of you as Daisy now, and it's not Daisy.
Charlotte.
Sorry?
Charlotte.
Sorry, Charlotte. It just went out of my head. Okay, Charlotte. So, you said something about this daisy, but I'm wondering, as you look at it now, what stands out to you? What do you see as you look at this daisy that you've drawn?
It seems a bit clumsy is the first word what comes to mind.
Clumsy, okay. So there seems like something clumsy about this daisy. Do you recognise that?
I was going to say, I think maybe not clumsy, but maybe it's not very well thought through in regards to maybe like size and perspective in the drawing, but also the fact that I'm quite conscious that I don't tend to rationally think decisions through, that I normally go straight in. So I don't take a lot of time to reflect in regards to my thought process, in regards to options or decisions. I more act than rationalise.
Okay, so you really recognise that and understand that that's saying something about how you are. And I'm looking at the parts of the daisy. Can you tell me something about the parts or the colours? What do you see? What do you notice?
I was going to say then it's probably the most focal point happens to be the pollen.
This part?
Yes. So the biggest part, and I think that also maybe just represents like a brightness and a warmth and sort of like a sunshine quality.
Okay, and that's the biggest part you said, and you said it was pollen. And pollen, what comes up for you when I say the word pollen?
For some reason, bees is the first thing that springs to mind unconsciously.
Okay, so pollen and there's bees, and bees, what do you think of when you think of bees? What comes to mind?
I think they're quite fluffy, which is getting really scary because like I'm holding a fluffy book. So I think in regards to softness and fluffiness.
So softness and fluffiness, and what you said was there was something that was the most prominent or the biggest part was the softness and the fluffiness and something about that. And I saw you say it was scary and you've got fluffy. So I guess you're recognising that that's something that you connect with.
Absolutely.
And the part here, what would you call that? This part here?
They are my petals. Is what they.
Okay. And what can you tell me about these petals?
I was going to say, in regards to them, I mean, I think there's an aspect of them that they are still quite large in regards to scale, that they're quite, I was going to say cloud-like, they're quite wispy. So they're not very like structured. Oh my god, so
if you're saying that, I'm guessing that you're recognising that it's okay. So as I'm looking at this part that's sort of, you know, quite the flower part, I'm noticing this part here. What would you call that?
That's a stem.
Stem. Tell me something about stem. What do stems do?
They hold the weight of the flower. Okay,
and this stem, what do you notice about this stem?
That is a lot thinner than probably the actual weight of the flower.
Okay.
So that is yeah, so it's a lot thinner compared to the actual, sort of in dimensions to the actual petals and the pollen itself. That's a lot thinner. So yeah, what's holding what normally.
What comes up for you as you think about that? This flower that's being held up with this stem that's a lot thinner than perhaps it could be.
I think what's coming up for me is what's recognising in my personal life that I'm actually holding on a lot of weight of probably other people. I'm taking on board a lot of weight of other people and their feelings and their emotions in my personal life.
Okay. And this part here at the bottom of the stem?
That's a leaf.
What does leaf represent for you? What meaning does leaf have?
When I think of leaves, what's coming up for me right now is things like autumn, so things like change of seasons, but mainly change.
So change.
Yeah. So,
and how many leaves does this have?
It has one. My drawing has one leaf.
Okay, so it has one leaf, one change.
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah.
And it's connected to the part that you said was connected to, I don't know.
Yeah, so yes, this is all making a lot of sense. Yes. Okay, so if you were going to sum up the message that this has for you today, what do you think it's telling you? From the communication that we've just had, that the fact that even though I'm very a very bright, very fluffy, very soft individual that I have recently been holding a lot of weight from other people's feelings and emotions, but also I am going through a transition of a potential change in my life, is how I'll describe it, which I think is very fair.
Okay, so is that okay if I end it there?
Absolutely, yeah, not.
So without wanting to go into that, what do you want to ask me any questions or make any comments on the facilitation and what I did rather than on what Charlotte said?
I would say the way you interpreted the way of the daisy, was it the way you saw it, or is it because of the way Charlotte has drawn it?
Well, hopefully I didn't interpret. Hopefully when you watch the video back, you'll see what I did was mostly reflect and check out my understanding of what it meant for Charlotte. A big part of working in this way is to take real care not to put my own words in. If I put a word in, it can distract, and I'll show you the impact that can potentially have. But also, hopefully, you could see what I was doing was tracking and inviting Charlotte to talk about parts. I didn't name anything.
Going through the different elements of the drawing, and from those elements to explore those elements to reflect our own perception.
Absolutely. And so what I was doing was, if you notice, I didn't ask for any explanation. No. I just said, you know what that's about. And partly because we're recording, so I'm protecting and just allowing Charlotte to say what she would like. It's enough for me to know that you know what that means. I don't need to know what it means. You know what that means, and that's the point of the facilitation. And particularly because we're being a bit public.
Yes.
But just think about how much has come out. How long have I known you?
Yeah, in a short time.
10 minutes. So that gives you just a taste of the power of this way of working. We don't know each other. There's no confidentiality in place here. There's no ongoing relationship that's even holding this work. So this is just a 10-minute. No way in therapy would I ever have a client come in and find that much about a client through talking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. True.
That makes sense. So it's an incredibly powerful and magical and amazing way to work. And I'll show you, because I've got some slides here, I'd like to show you why. Because a really big part of working is to work non-directively, and a lot of people don't really understand what that means or why it's important. And I'd really like to show that because I'm actually very passionate about this. It really matters to me. Right, so can you see this image here? So if you were to imagine, right, so a client who's drawn this image, what does it look like to you? What would you say that is?
It's bright, it's strong.
It looks bright, it looks strong.
It even looks like a sunset or something that exploded.
Yeah, exploded, like explosion, like explosion, like a sun.
So you can see really quickly how many different interpretations there can be of one thing. It could be an explosion, it could be sunset, it could be sunrise, it looks strong, it looks bright. Now, there are various levels that are developed. Okay, so Liesl Silverstone developed four levels to person-centered art therapy, and I'm working on it at the moment and writing and developing theory, and I've added in an extra level. But let me just illustrate why this matters and what it looks like in practice. So if I was working with a client and they're at a conscious level, let's say stages 1 to 2, which is conscious, you know what you're talking about. So we were working, when you were talking with your flowers and you introduce them, you're consciously aware of what you're saying and why and what that meaning is, okay? And a client might say something like, this is the sun, beautiful sunset, I love sunsets, it's a blue sea, I like the sea. Oh, lovely, happy, bright, nice bright image. Now, as you continue to work with the facilitation in the way that I've just done, so not being directive, edge of awareness material, which hopefully you're familiar with that theoretical term, the stuff that just below the surface. can start to bubble up, and a client might say something like, oh, okay, as I'm looking at that image, I'm thinking of family holidays, but I'm noticing I feel sad and I'm feeling scared. I don't know why, but my chest is hurting. And that's material that's starting to want to be known.
Mm-hmm.
By using other skills, and there are specific skills that go with this way of working, which are like bridging and wider bridges, but fundamentally we're talking about empathising and being non-directive, but with visual. What can then emerge is the stuff that the client doesn't know, what really is going on, because all images contain material at a conscious level and subconscious levels. So when you look at an image, you don't know what that really is about at first glance. So as more subconscious material starts to emerge, which only really emerges if you work non-directively, if you can make a safe, non-judgmental environment and relationship, a client can feel safe to be undefended and this material can just come up. So a client starts to discover that the sun represents the client's sun. And this is often happens. A sun will represent the sun, or you know, there's often various word plays. Words are like symbols that need extra more care than when working verbally. And the client then discovers that actually blue represents sadness and her sadness is vast. And the paper colour's black. And she realises that actually that blackness, she's scared. This is a sunset and the warmth is dying and something's disappearing and she feels really scared. And then she says, my son's been diagnosed with cancer and I'm terrified. I think he's dying. So you can feel the power of that. And hopefully you can see how an image contains material that is very different to what it initially looks like. Mm-hmm. Now, if you remember at the start when I was saying to you, it's really important to not put words on it. If I'd have started this facilitation saying, oh, wow, that's a nice bright image.
Yeah.
How would have been a layer that the client probably would never have got to that knowing. That would not come past. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the words matter a lot because my words can colour almost like a barrier to allowing a client's knowing to emerge, to make meaning if I'm colouring it with my own words or interpretations. So hugely important and actually much harder to do than it looks like.
Yeah.
Much harder. There's a lot of learning and practice that you need to do to understand how to not get in the way of a client's actualising tendency really in the process. So I'll stop sharing there.
Okay.
So how was that? What did you think of that? Have you got any questions or any comments?
I would say it was you sort of gave us the insight of what you do every day. And it's a test of what you do every day. The interpretation of the that vibrant picture was really brilliant because each and every person can look at it and think totally different. But it had two shades. The bottom shade was as if it's fading, and then the top one was really lighter and happy, but both put together.
But not my words. I'm not putting together.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the process. You know, as you go deeper in the image, you know, when you show those different you know, levels, stages, as the client reflects, you know, in the picture and explores it, goes deeper and deeper and finds, you know, meanings that are like in a subconscious level. That's very interesting, and that probably can be done in a quick way, in a fast way, compared with just counseling, talking therapy.
Yeah, in actual fact, when I did my training, I did this training first. And then in order to do this work, I had to train as what I called a talking counsellor, and I had to go and do talking. And I really thought of talking as like second rate. And when I first started, I was quite shocked at how slow it was because I'd started off with the speed of work and the depth. So, but you know, that has changed as I've trained and I've been doing it longer and have integrated. So it can be very fast, but only if the client's ready. And it's also really important not to go ahead of a client's pace and speed, because you can really harm. And to interpret or to laugh, if you laugh at something, one of the first things students learn when they come is I say, don't comment on people's images and don't laugh. When the client's laughing, don't laugh. The client will laugh as a defence to change an atmosphere. But to laugh at something, you don't know what that represents. It could connect to sexual abuse, it could connect to bereavement, it could connect to an aspect of their self-concept, and it can be very painful, even though the client's laughing.
It can create a connection, a connotation that is not good, I think, because the client could be thinking that, you are laughing at him, probably.
Because the client themselves are using it as a defense mechanism instead of then going underneath the actual why they've drawn it or want to explain. So what I'm getting from this is the fact is that basically by using art, nothing appears as it seems. So just because they draw something like, say, a sunset, or I drew a daisy or whatever, it's not the actual image itself. Nothing is what it physically looks like. It's a lot more in depth than that.
Absolutely.
I think
powerful stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it is the surprise even for ourselves, because when you have done the simple drawing of a flower, at first you don't think much about it, but when you go into it, information starts to come up from your internal processing. That's
only if you feel ready, only if it's safe, only if it feels, it's really important to respect a client's actualising tendency and their pace and their defensive. And sometimes you can work with the client and say, what does daisy mean to you? And they'll go, nothing, it's a daisy, it's yellow, they're yellow, aren't they? And you will go nowhere, and that's fine, because that's the client's defence mechanism. Not knowing is an appropriate defence. So then we stay with, okay, we did a flower and it meant nothing. What's that like for you? It's really important to be non-directive. I'm really not good with direction around facilitation of art, because I know how much it can hurt, and I've always been very passionate about that. As has Liesl, who, she invented this model. But I've got one eye on the time. I'm not sure what time you would like to end, because we started late.
Oh, yeah.
Do you mind if we ask you some questions? Is that okay?
I was just thinking, yeah, because I know I'll talk forever. Ask me what you want to ask me.
Just out of really quick curiosity, I mean, in regards to, you say you've done things like talking therapy and verbalised communication compared to art therapy, would you say that, and this is just off the top of the cuff, would you say that clients that then progress more quickly, or they come to more towards that actualising tendency towards a fully functioning person with art therapy compared to, say, maybe talking therapy?
Absolutely. I mean, not all clients do. I don't really separate art therapy or not art therapy. So I'm in my room, you can see I've got my sand tray, I've got my materials, and I also use an iPad. So when the client comes in, if we're working face to face, I'll say, here's my room, here are the materials I have, you're free to use any or not use them. And if I think I've got a really strong feeling that something might be helpful, I might suggest it, and you can say yes or no. So anything can happen, not just art.
That's introduced in the beginning of the session. You introduced that
at the start of the relationship in contracting.
Some of the questions we've got to ask runs through this. So I'll let Paolo ask the questions before we then.
To answer your question, you said, do they progress more quickly? I think so, because if I'm empathising with your conscious self, that's one thing. If you bring another aspect of yourself in an image, and I'm empathising with that too, I'm empathising with more of you. So more of you gets to experience unconditional positive regard, and therefore it's more powerful. That's just my personal idea. That's my thinking on it and my experience.
Okay, shall we do the questions? They repeat a bit what we are being saying.
Yeah, my apologies.
We are going to repeat a bit what we have already asked, but this is our questionnaire. How is the option of creative art introduced in the person-centered counseling session? Is it mentioned within the client's contract, or art materials are placed within the counseling room to only be acknowledged by the client themselves? That's what we talked about in the beginning.
There are different ways of working, and there are different ways of being person-centred. I think you've heard of the tribes of the person-centred nation. I'm hoping.
Yeah. We got that.
Yeah. In the same way, I like the idea of branches. Mick Cooper used branches of the person-centred nation, which I like. There are different branches of working with art therapy. You can work in a way that's more expressive arts, Natalie Rogers, which would be more along the lines of the first facilitation, when I invite you to talk. And Natalie Rogers likes to use lots of expressive arts. So that would be done at contracting, and that's a different way of working. Liesl brought art therapy skills to the facilitation in a person-centred way. So the way of working that I showed you with bridging and reflecting and being quite conscious of covering an image, that's Liesl's work. So there are different ways of working. This approach, and to be honest, all my students are, yeah, absolutely, say it in contracting. Here am I, here's how we're going to work, this is what I offer, this is what's available, how do you want to work, what do you want? And clients will say, I don't think I want to work with art, or yes, I want to come and work with art, or I'm scared, I don't think I can draw. That's probably the most common thing. And that's a whole nother story to that. But yeah.
Well, the next question has been already in some way, answered also, but what are the benefits of using art in the counseling in the PCA? The fact that the client has the possibility to express himself or herself through creation of art, image, or other similar means besides the verbal expression.
It's always, to me from the start, if I expect a client to sit in my room and talk, I'm imposing a way of communication. I'm narrowing how a client can communicate. So by having a range, it's always just seemed sensible to me. If I'm going to follow a client's direction, I need to be open to lots of direction and lots of ways of working, whether that's, moving or using art or using sound or hearing a story. So I don't restrict that. So I think it's more person-centred to have a range of materials available. But also, not sometimes, particularly with trauma, things can be very difficult to put into words, either because it's hard to say them, but also sometimes experiences are stored in parts of the brain that don't process verbally. And so sometimes art is the only way, in my experience, of somebody being able to express, and it is that expression that helps part of the healing process and the processing of of change, of transformation. So it's really important and really non-directive, because I think it's more directive to expect a client to sit and talk, but not everyone is going to agree with that opinion.
Yeah. The next one is the client helped to use or become familiar with the different art materials, mediums?
I don't offer help unless a client wants. I explain, I'll ask, I say, are you familiar with all the materials? And if they say, oh, I don't know what they are, I might say, oh, yeah, I have pastels, they're like posh chalks. But I tend to not give direction
in case the client,
how to use.
In case the client, show, like a preference, or say, oh, what is that material? Can I use this one? Or I would like to try that, or...
There's a lot more, there's a lot of progression that sometimes you see. So the clients might sometimes start off using pencils and very few colours, and then they start to use coloured colours, and their pictures become more vibrant, and then they start to use paints. That process is a very important thing to notice and recognise and work with and understand, because that often what happens in the therapy session is an indication of what's happening outside. So as a client moves from a rigidity, let's say, or a fearfulness to something that's freer and experimentation, you can often see that in what they're doing with their art. There are sometimes I would give some suggestion for themes, like I did with you. Would you like to imagine yourself as a flower? And there's a reason for doing that, because often there are layers of conditioning that can prevent being in touch with that unconditioned part of yourself. So sometimes giving a theme is a helpful thing to do. But aside from that, no, I wouldn't give direction or help or suggestions as to how to use things. If I did that, I would miss the true creativity of people and the ingenuity of everyone, and they surprise me constantly.
Okay. This one is more or less linked to the previous one. Are there preferred materials because of the ease of use or price?
For me or for my clients?
Both perspectives.
I tend to not put glitter out for younger children because it gets everywhere in my house and it's annoying. So I tend to, if I'm in a hall, I'll put glitter out. If I'm not, I'll be a little bit, yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't like cleaning all the glitter up anymore. Not really. I think there is a difference in what clients want to use. I think, have you come across the term of digital natives and digital immigrants? So if you have a look at that, that's a really interesting thing that says people who are younger have been born into a digital age. And so their first nature, if you like, is to use an iPad or use digital media.
Yeah, they are not used to use materials.
So for often clients who are slightly younger, they will often choose an iPad to draw with or use an iPad in much freer ways that older clients might not. And so in the same way, if you give me a pen and paper, it's you know, I find that less stressful than an iPad. Younger people will find an iPad less stressful than a paper and pencil. And again, you know, there's a whole book in that alone about, you know, on an iPad you can undo a mistake, whereas actually on paper and pencil the mistakes have a real value for exploration in therapy. So there, you know, there's a lot.
That's a very interesting perspective. I'm just reflecting on it because, you know, obviously when you draw in paper or with real, you know, physical materials, the marks that you do, they are there. Whereas in iPad, you know, if you get some regret, you can, you know, quickly erase a bit or.
Absolutely. And when I first, you know, my research, I did research for my master's using an iPad in therapy, and I introduced that into therapy, and I have been meaning for years to write a paper on it. But I was really against it at first because I thought, no, what do we do if we're not going to look at the mistakes? And there's a real value therapeutically to the mistakes. And I was really worried about that. But in actual fact, being able to undo mistakes seems to enable people to feel freer and less inhibited because they're less worried about it. And so they bring a different freedom and also have got the ability with digital art to make the art a more accurate representation of what they want to express, because you can do lots of things with it.
Yeah, because your ability, you don't need to develop extreme ability to express certain things, because you can get already made elements like, you know, circles, wherever, you know, your line or trace will be different also.
And if you make a mistake, you can undo it and redo it, and you can change things. So yeah, there are pros and cons for both, but it's not something I would make a decision on, because I would just want to find out what a client would want to do. And I think creativity is another really important part of why this way of working is important, because it facilitates creativity developing. And creativity links to actualization and also links to a fully functioning person, if you like. Even if you look at Maslow, fully functioning person, which nobody exists, but the more at the top of the pyramid you are, the more creative things you tend to do. But the more creative things you tend to do tends to promote moving up as well. So there's a link, there's a link, I think, anyway.
Okay. How is the time of the session managed using art materials? Is there a difference in the way that the session is managed because of the use of art materials or the timing?
Not really. I think the only thing generally is I tend to ask clients at some point earlier if they'd like to work with art, because introducing it 5 minutes before the end is not a good idea. So there's a bit of management with that. Some clients will draw to the last minute of the session because they don't want to be facilitated.
Okay.
So they'll use the whole session to draw. Some clients will draw and then come back the next session and work on an image for 2 or 3 weeks. Some don't. The variety and the difference in clients is just vast, really. That when you let go of what you think should happen and you just follow and watch what a client, and you facilitate and enable that, you get to discover wonderful things, you know.
That means that the client can keep working in a piece for several sessions. Can happen that.
Clients do all sorts of things. Sometimes clients do that. Sometimes clients want to drop their artwork up and put it in the bin. I wince internally when they do that, but that, you know, that's okay. Sometimes clients ask if they can burn their images, and we've done that and gone and burned and buried the ashes in the garden. Some clients take images with them, some don't, all different things.
That's interesting.
But what matters is what the client wants. What matters is helping them also voice what they want. Making it okay to voice and ask for what they want is an important part.
Okay, because this is interesting, because the next question is completely related with that. Was what will happen with the pieces of work produced? Are they kept for a certain period of time on site if the client doesn't want to take them home? If the client's pieces of art are kept on site, how are they stored to ensure confidentiality? Because I'm thinking, for example, if the client wants you to keep the piece of work.
Mm-hmm. I keep them. I do ask to keep them while the work is continuing. Sometimes not. Sometimes if the client, you know, really wants to destroy something. Since we've gone digital, and don't forget, you know, I started practicing before computers, I think. So, you know, even taking a photo of a piece of art is quite new world for me. So I learned to say to clients, can I just take a photo of your art, so that we've got it to look at later if we need to. Some clients say no, they don't want to, they want it in the bin, that's fine. So a lot of stuff now is stored digitally, and I keep it in a locked folder on my screen. Some of the materials I've got here are in a closed drawer. And what I do is hold them if the client wants me to, and we take them out from time to time, sometimes to look or review, particularly towards an ending, to look at where they started and where they've ended up. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of, you can see an awful lot through the process. What somebody started with and what somebody ended with can be vastly different. And then I invite them to do what they want. Do they want to take their art with them, or what would they like to do? Okay. Some do, some don't. I have a cupboard full of art that's been donated. Okay. So it just depends, really.
I was just to ask, you know, what happens if the client, for example, wants to offer the piece of art to you, saying, look, keep it. I don't want to take it home, but I would like you to keep it or to stay with you.
Sometimes I do. I worked for about 7 years in London with a group of drug offenders, so offenders and people who were using drugs, who had, anyway, as part of the group in this drug treatment program, clients would often say to me, can you keep my art and put it up? Okay. And so we would display it, and there was something very powerful and important about that. Sometimes younger clients have asked me if I would put it up. I have this, you can't see it, but I've got a thing here where I've got a thing that I sometimes put art up on, either to dry or something I've drawn goes on that little notice board thing. And sometimes they want for it to be up there. I don't usually, though, because I don't think it's appropriate in my own place to display art, because another client comes in and will see it. So that's a whole different thing. Sometimes when they've wanted it on the wall, I've put it on the wall. When they go, I take it down, and then before they come back, I'll put it back up. But that's part of keeping the room how they want it for them.
Okay, their work there.
So I would still protect their confidentiality within here. But when I've done it in a group setting, I think it's just different, and people wanted to, and they're very proud of their work, and the work was like huge. Sometimes we did huge, you know, wall-sized poster paintings, and we would display them. So it's a whole different thing, really. But the key is always, what does the client want?
Okay.
That's the key. People can be very hung up on confidentiality, but like now, you know, you're happy for this to be recorded. If you're happy for it to be shown, then that's fine. You're in charge of your material. I don't have to worry about that confidentiality, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's it for me.
Yes, may I just ask, let's say from whoever is referring the clients to you, do they choose for the client what the client want? For example, let's say if the client needed counseling, how do they know what sort of counseling does the client want?
That's something I think that is for the therapist to always work out with the client, regardless of who is sending them and why. So let's say it has happened that somebody was referred to me by a mental health team specifically for art therapy, but the client wanted to talk, so we talk, because obviously I would always honour what a client wants. And it often happens with children, that children come and they're referred because a parent thinks they need to talk about a particular topic or work in a particular way. But again, I think I think it's important to create a bubble around a client, and within that you make a therapeutic environment where their autonomy is respected and promoted in terms of the person-centered approach. But I guess the only thing, you know, I'd like to add is, if you'd like to find out more, is to have a look at the site for the association. So Liesl Silverstone, who's the founder of this approach, I was, for a number of years, we had the Person-Centered Art Therapy Association. And last year, I changed it and founded the Association for Person-Centered Creative Arts. So you can have a look on there at some of the developments and some of the work and some of the things that I'm doing. And if I just promote my own association for a little bit, what I've also done is brought to it, whereas with Liesl, the association was really about supporting practice, APCA is more about not only supporting practice, but actually it's a non-profit association, and I'm using the money to do art in the community too. So it's more about bringing art and person-centered art, people being able to just draw and paint with no assessment, interpretation or judgment, is also a really important part of this to promote mental health and well-being. Anyway, advert over.
Okay, very well. Thank you very much. It was very kind of you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. I found that really powerful.
It was really interesting experience, you know.
Good. Well, I always love talking about this approach. I'm very passionate. So yeah, I'm glad that you got what you needed. So are you going to stop recording?
Yes.
I was just about to say.
Where is that?
Pause stop. This one here.
Yeah, there.